Hi, bonjour, ciao, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to another episode. Can I call it an episode? Yeah, we'll call it an episode. Welcome to another episode of my Medicine Gone Wrong series, where I discuss and talk about case studies and stories where medicine has unfortunately gone wrong. Now, this particular video is one that cannot be taken lightly, and it's one that requires a lot of empathy and sympathy, because this particular video involves the death of, unfortunately, a lot of children at the hands of one particular individual. The actions of this individual is completely sickening. It is callous, and just even researching this particular story was just so unbelievably upsetting. So consider this a trigger warning, because this video will detail a lot of disgusting actions that unfortunately led to the deaths of some children, as well as the harm of some children. So please bear that in mind when you watch the video. But yeah, this video is all about the angel of death. Beverley Gale Allitt was born on the 4th of October in 1968 in a village near Grantham, so that's in the district of Lincolnshire. She had two sisters and a brother, and she came from a working class background. Now, throughout her growing up, so the phases of her growing up, Allitt was known to be very attention seeking. She would wear bandages and casts over wounds, but wouldn't allow anyone to actually examine those apparent wounds and injuries. She spent considerable amounts of time in hospitals seeking medical attention for a number of concerns. However, a lot of these concerns ended up not actually being concerns in a way, and it even got to the point where it ended up in her removal of a perfectly healthy appendix. Growing up, she would fake her symptoms and her ailments, and like I said before, this was assumed to have been done so for attention-seeking reasons. She was considered to be a hypochondriac, and her reputation and her attention-seeking behaviours just led her to have to resort to what is called doctor hopping, because doctors and other healthcare professionals became familiar with her tricks and her actions and her deceits and everything. So she had to completely find new doctors to try and potentially trick them into receiving treatment that she didn't actually need. Now, Allitt's behaviour appeared to be like that of Munchausen syndrome, which is a syndrome where you deliberately act as if you've got a physical or a mental illness, often for attention-seeking purposes. When Allitt got older, she would volunteer for babysitting. She left school at 16 and took a course in nursing at Grantham College. Whilst training, Allitt's odd behaviours continued, and despite these behaviours and poor attendance and even being underqualified, she managed to gain a temporary 6-month contract at an understaffed Grantham and Kesteven hospital in 1991. Allitt worked in children's ward 4. Now, this ward is infamous as a result of the unfortunate effects that ensued, but that hospital and that ward in particular lacked sufficient staff. And I guess that could explain why her behaviour and all her actions went undetected for as long as it did, because they just didn't have enough support to ensure that they could keep a close eye on things. Allitt ended up being convicted of murdering 4 children and attempting to murder more. Her victims were from as young as 2 months to 11 years old, and I can't even imagine how awful it must have been for the families, and it's just painful knowing what they had gone through and what Allitt had done to them, and it's just horrific. In 1991, Beverley Allitt had claimed her first victim. It was 7-month-old Liam Taylor. Taylor was admitted to the ward for a chest infection, and Allitt had gone out of her way to persuade Liam's parents that he was safe and in capable hands. However, when his parents returned, they found Liam to have suffered a respiratory emergency, but luckily he had recovered. His parents chose to then spend the night with Liam, as did Allitt, who took up an extra night duty. Liam had another respiratory emergency, but he had come through it, and it wasn't until Allitt was left alone with a boy that his condition had worsened. He became worryingly pale and had red blotches all over his face. Allitt had called for an emergency resuscitation team as Liam had suffered from a cardiac arrest. However, they were unable to save him. One thing that's important to note when it comes to Liam Taylor's death is the fact that although Allitt had called for an emergency resuscitation team, there were no alarms that had sounded to indicate respiratory stress. Now, when someone has something going on with their heart, for example, they are wired up to heart monitors and machines. So if something was wrong, then alarms would have sounded. Her next victim was Timothy Hardwick, an 11-year-old boy with cerebral palsy. He had come to Children's Ward 4 as a result of an epileptic fit just 2 weeks after Liam Taylor's death. Like Taylor, Allitt was the nurse responsible for Timothy, and she had again called for an emergency resuscitation team as Hardwick was found to be turning blue and without a pulse, and unfortunately the team were unable to revive him. Kaylee Desmond was Allitt's third victim, and after being admitted for a chest infection that she was supposed to be getting better from and recovering from, like with Liam and like with Timothy, Kaylee had gone into cardiac arrest. Now, this time the emergency resuscitation team were luckily able to revive her, and she was transferred to a different hospital as a result. This is when they found something rather odd. Under Kaylee's armpit, they found a puncture site, a hole, and an air bubble near that puncture mark, and this was assumed to be accidental, so no further investigation at the time was initiated. Paul Crampton, who was 5 months old, was next, and despite only coming in for a non-serious bronchial infection, Paul fell into a near coma on 3 different occasions. And guess who was responsible for his care? Once again, Beverley Allitt. Now, the cause of his near comas was something called insulin shock. Although at the time this wasn't able to be explained, Allitt was actually purposefully administering lethal doses of insulin into Crampton. This had caused his blood sugar levels to significantly drop, leading to him becoming what is called dangerously hypoglycemic. In an article I read, Allitt accurately diagnosed Crampton's hypoglycemia, not because she was experienced, but because she was the one who was injecting him with the insulin that caused the hypoglycemia in the first place. No suspicions were aroused at first, and Allitt just continued her spree of violence unchecked. In total, she unfortunately claimed 4 young lives and attempted to murder 9 other children. These events took place over a period of only 59 days between February and April of 1991. The reason that the suspicion started to arise is because the number of cardiac arrests in Children's Ward 4 were relatively a lot, and this was rather suspicious. Now, the police were called and found Allitt to be the only nurse on duty for all of these attacks. Police felt that they had enough evidence to charge Allitt with murder by the end of July in 1991. However, she wasn't formally charged until November. On the 28th of May in 1993, Allitt received 13 life sentences for her crimes, and she was termed to be a serious danger, as she was. The impact of Allitt's case led to the maternity unit at that hospital being closed down completely. Allitt's motive was never fully explained, but as if you hopefully can remember at the start of this video, I spoke about how she potentially may have suffered from Munchausen syndrome. Now, there's another version of this condition called Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which is where a caregiver or a person creates the appearance of health problems in someone else. So rather than causing harm on herself like she did when she was younger, By doing so to someone else, this could potentially be her way of trying to gain attention. And again, it's just callous. Munchausen syndrome by proxy is termed to be very, very controversial. But yeah, I guess it could kind of explain why Allitt had done it. Actually no, that doesn't even, it doesn't really explain why she did it. But again, potentially for attention-seeking purposes, she inflicted harm on herself and other people. It's just, it's hard to talk about. So instead of going to prison, Allitt actually went to Rampton Security Hospital. Now, this place is a high security facility housing that's function is to mainly detain people under the Mental Health Act. Even in this facility, Allitt had continued to inflict damage on herself for attention, including pouring boiling water onto her hand and ingesting ground glass. In this facility, Allitt ended up admitting to her actions, and she's now on the Home Office list for criminals who will never be eligible for parole. Allitt's actions are awful, they are horrific, and I still to this day just can never, it can never settle in my mind what she had done. There are a number of books and dramatizations that have been made about her life, and yeah. I want to leave you with this quote that I read when I was reading up on this particular case study. And it's that while we might not know exactly what happened on Ward 4, the angel of death will always be remembered for turning medicine into murder. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.